Hi friends out there in the world. I am up here in Alaska with my family on vacation, and we've had a couple of really cool experiences with glaciers, and I wanted to share that with you and tell you guys a little bit about it because I'd heard a lot about glaciers before I came here, but I'd never been around them, and now that I'm around them and I've had a couple of experiences with them, I've found that they're really, really cool and unique, and I've learned a lot about them that I wanted to share. We're up in an area called Seward, which is down south of Anchorage a little ways, and there is an ice sheet in the mountains around here. It's called the Harding Ice Field, and it creates several glaciers from it, and this one is called Exit Glacier. You see behind me. And apparently it was discovered when some people were hiking over from a town called Homer and trying to find a way off of the Harding Ice Field. And this was the only glacier that ended in a valley and not in the water. So there are two different kinds of glaciers. One of them, like this, ends in a valley on land, and then the other kind is called a tidal glacier, and that ends in the water. And those are the ones that are most famous for the calving, which is where big chunks of ice will break off of the face and fall into the water. But it's really, really impressive when the really big glaciers break off and fall into the ocean. Glaciers are really special because it takes a really long time for them to form, and it's a really special process, and they're really unique for that. It takes 10 feet of snow 10 years to make 1 cubic foot of glacial ice. So obviously glaciers come from places where it's either snowy or overcast pretty much all year round, and obviously that's on the poles, but there are also glaciers that happen on really tall mountains closer to the equator in like Ecuador and Mexico and other places around the globe, which is really cool. And one of the things that has to happen for something to be considered a glacier is that it has to move. So these are considered rivers of ice because due to gravity, they're always moving downhill. And this one, Exit Glacier, moves at about 1 foot per day. So says the interpretive signage. So they are really moving rivers of ice, and they're also considered, though, like bulldozers, natural bulldozers, and conveyor belts, because you can see that it's really, like, there's some dark spots in there, especially right there. That's called a moraine, and that's where it's pulling a lot of the sediment off of the walls and carrying it downhill. It also creates what's called glacial silt, which is really, really fine powder that comes from the rocks that is called rock flour sometimes. And that's all the rivers up here in Alaska, for the most part, are full of glacial silt. The glaciers will carve out all the valleys that they're in, and you can see where old glaciers, or where the glacier used to be, looking at the sides of the valley. So I'll show you real quick. If you look over there, you can see that there's all this is rock until about here where the vegetation starts. So that's where historically the glacier used to go to. But with climate change, there's been a large retreat of glaciers around the world. And so you can tell the retreat because they're losing altitude, which means that they're not that tall anymore, and they're also going backwards. Walking up to the base of this glacier, there were several signs along the trail that showed in like 1917 where the glacier was, 1950 where the glacier was, and then there's one that shows where it was in 2005, which was only 11 years ago, and now it's already a good 100 to 200 feet farther uphill than it was before. Another cool thing about glaciers is that the reason that they're blue is that over time, when the ice gets more and more compacted, all the little air bubbles that are trapped in there from the snow get squeezed out, and so the air bubbles are what reflects the light, and that's what makes it look white. But as those get pressed out, then the ice is really clear, and there's not a lot of other impurities in it. So you get the blue because the ice is able to absorb every other color frequency in the white light spectrum except for blue, so that gets reflected back out. Part of my experience with the glacier that was so cool was a couple days ago, my dad and I went ice climbing on one called Spencer Glacier, which is at another point on the Kenai Peninsula. And it was so cool because one of the features that gets formed is called a moulin, and that's like a big hole that goes down into the glacier that's caused by melting water. And it was so beautiful. I got to get lowered down into the moulin and then climb back out of it. And it was just amazing to be deep down into the glacier, surrounded by this really glassy ice that was so clear blue. Like you could see 3 to 4 feet into the walls of the glacier. And it was amazing. You know, you could see little pebbles back in there and like a few spaces where air pockets were still there. But it really looked like, you know, the clearness of the blue really looked like a swimming pool that had been frozen, like flash frozen. So that was really awesome. So another cool thing about glaciers is that they also create their own weather, sort of. There's something called a katabatic wind that they cause, which is where the air that's all around it gets cooled, and so it condenses and then rolls downhill. There are stories of people who have set up camp somewhere downhill and just get blasted at various points throughout the day with this like really cold wind. So as you can see, it's windy here, and it's definitely a lot colder being around the glacier than, you know, being up on the sides of the hill or further away from it. That was one of the things that I noticed when we went up to Surprise Glacier, which is the one where we got to see the calving and we took the boat trip there, was that the wind was so cold because it's coming off of these like really, really frozen places and coming down and just like blasting with this frozen air. All right, here we go. This is Surprise Glacier. It is cold up here. Wow.
With the starboard side facing to the glacier first here shortly. Currently off our 1-2 o'clock over there, there are some harbor seals all around the ice.
I'm also linking to this video a documentary that was made by a man named James Baylog, who's a really famous photographer, and he's done for several years a really important project called Extreme Ice Survey, where he and a team of researchers and other photographers and adventurers have set up cameras that photograph glaciers for a year, and then they have this time-lapse footage of them, and you can see this really, really active movement and retreat of the glaciers. And it's really important because glaciers have over 70% of the world's freshwater reserves are in the glaciers. But of course, when they melt, then it all goes to the ocean, and then it becomes saltwater. So as we're losing glaciers, we're also losing really important sources of fresh water for our planet. They're also really important climate stabilizers, and it's sort of what helps keep the poles cold. Obviously, is ice. And that has impacts all around the world that this documentary talks about too. So I really, really encourage you guys to watch that as well, and check it out. Like I said, the glaciers are really, really awesome, and I didn't know just how cool they were until coming up and getting to experience it. And unfortunately, I wasn't able to go down to the glacier this time around because like the edges of them are pretty unstable, and so it's important to go with guides that know the glaciers well, instead of just go walking around on them. But yeah, they're really special, and I just wanted to share that with you guys.
So unfortunately, with my terrible little camera, you can't quite see, but there are a whole bunch of little harbor seals on the ice right there. Ooh, heard a crack from the ice.